Om. Om Hari Om. Om Sahana Vavatu. Sahanao Bhunaktu. Sahaviryam Karavahai. Tejasvinavaditamastu. Ma Vidvisha Vahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om, may the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Well, good morning, everyone. So glad to have you with us this morning. Some announcements, of course. Classes, talks, evening arati, and monthly Chandi readings are now ongoing again via Zoom. Many of you already know that and are participating. Please note that the Saturday Realizing God class now meets from noon to 1 p.m. We regret that we can't meet in person for now. Breakthrough infections of COVID-19's Delta variant are becoming more and more common. We must not risk the health of any devotee or friend by meeting face to face. Yet we hope you will continue to join us online and study together the art of spirituality in one another's holy company. For those of you who don't know, Zoom access links, all the links, are the same as before. They can be found on our website and in each week's e-newsletter. Again, welcome. And here's a brief rendition of something called The Lord is on the Main Line, written by Rai Kuder. The Lord is on that main line. Tell him what you want. The Lord is on that main line. Tell him what you want. The Lord is on that main line. Tell him what you want. Call him up and tell him what you want. His line is never busy. Tell him what you want. His line is never busy. Tell him what you want. That line is never busy. Tell him what you want. Call him up and tell him what you want. If you want to wake up, tell him what you want. If you want your freedom, tell him what you want. If you want to wake up, tell him what you want. Call him up and tell him what you want. Call him up, call him up, call him up and tell him what you want. Om. Amen. Today's topic is Waking from Maya's Spell, Part 2. We got somewhat through, a little more than halfway through what was intended last week, in part, of course, because we had a wonderful and very productive discussion and conversation among ourselves, and I hope that happens again this week. Please be forthcoming if you're of a mind to. So to begin, who fully knows that mystery, the Formless One, here with us as two? They came again as Thakur, their love can set you free. Hear the Master calling, come to me, come to me. Hear the Mother praying, set them free, set them free. Hear the Master calling, come to me, come to me. Hear the Mother praying, set them free. Set them free from what? This is from Bhagavad Gita chapter 5. Krishna says, do not say, God gave us this delusion. You dream that you are the doer. You dream that action is done. You dream that action bears fruit. It is your ignorance. It is the world's delusion that gives you these dreams. I'm going to repeat that. Sri Krishna says in chapter 5 of the Gita, do not say, God gave us this delusion. You dream that you are the doer. You dream that action is done. You dream that action bears fruit. It is your ignorance. It is the world's delusion that gives you these dreams. And then the assertion from here, this is Maya's spell, this delusion, this dream. In his song, Breaker of This World's Chain, Kandana Bhavana, Swami Vivekananda wrote of Sri Ramakrishna, let us look deep in thine eyes. They are bright with the wisdom of God that can wake us from Maya's spell. Let us look deep in thine eyes. They are bright with the wisdom of God that can wake us from Maya's spell. Here is some of that wisdom offered on Sunday, August 3rd, 1884. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in his room at Dakshineshwar after his midday meal. The master began the conversation by addressing some visiting Baul musicians. He spoke to some visiting Baul musicians. The master said, yoga is not possible if the mind dwells on woman and gold. The mind of a worldly man generally moves among the three lower centers, those at the navel, at the sexual organ, and at the organ of evacuation. After great effort and spiritual practice, the Kundalini is awakened. When awakened, it passes through the lower centers and comes to the Anahata, which is at the heart. It stays there. It stays there. At that time, the mind of the aspirant is withdrawn from the three lower centers. He feels the awakening of divine consciousness and cries out, what is this? What is this? According to the Vedas, these centers are called bhumi, plains. There are 7 such plains. The center at the heart corresponds to the 4th plane of the Vedas. Ishvara Kotis, such as the incarnation of God, can come down from the 7th plane and the state of samadhi. They can descend from this exalted state because they like to live in the company of devotees and enjoy the love of God. God retains in them the ego of knowledge or the ego of devotion, so that they may teach men. Great sages, after attaining the knowledge of Brahman, kept the servant ego and the ego of devotion. They are like big steamships, which not only cross the ocean themselves, but carry many passengers to the other shore. They are like a pitcher brimful of water. Part of the water may be poured into another pitcher. These perfected souls describe to others the various spiritual disciplines by which they have realized God. They do this only to teach others and to help them. They do this only to teach others and to help them in spiritual life. So this is why we find all of the great spiritual teachers unattached, as Sri Krishna says in the Gita. He lacks for nothing, he wants nothing, he's attached to nothing. But he comes out of love for suffering humanity again and again to destroy the sin of the sinner, to reestablish righteousness, and to set us free. Now, this is where we kind of left off last week, on a process that I'd like to describe to you. The process is for rising from those three lower centers to the fourth center and then above them. And the sequence, though this is done as an integrated process, the sequence is finding reverence, abandoning selfishness, sinking into silence, and setting aside the mirror. So what does it mean to find reverence? When we discover, when we awaken, the three graces are human birth, the desire for liberation, and the grace of a qualified teacher. When we come to this point, and it happens spontaneously and at the exact perfect time, Sri Ramakrishna says, exactly the right time, when we come to this full feeling of desiring our freedom, desiring to wake up from this endless round of desire, satisfaction of desire, no real lasting satisfaction, a new desire, a new attraction, a new aversion, distraction, keeping us enmeshed, entangled in those three lower centers. Something happens, and we begin to have this feeling that there is something greater than this small self. And that's the dawning of reverence. And it's then, and I can guarantee you that in each of you who is here is with us this morning, this happened long ago for you. Long ago. Because you've returned to it in this lifetime. And so you are now well along the path. Some reason for reverence has been found. So having found that reverence and practicing some sort of spiritual activities, spiritual disciplines, as they're called. The great effort has been made. So when this happens, and the Kundalini, the spiritual energy within us, rises to the heart, then we see the reason for abandoning selfishness. Because we see that it is selfishness, this self-centeredness, this dream that we are the doer, this dream that we are the actor, the dream that the fruits of action are ours, is fruitless. Fruitless. So we wish to be free of that delusion. We see that to do this, we must abandon selfishness. What does that mean, to abandon selfishness? It means not seeing everything that happens to us in terms of its effect on us, but rather seeing what happens around us as it affects others, and how we can be of service. As Sri Krishna and Sri Ramakrishna and Jesus, they all say, just offer it up. Do everything sacramentally. Do everything as an act of worship. And you are abandoning selfishness. Why is it important to abandon selfishness? It's not so that you will be a good person. Yes, you will be a good person. You were already a good person. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come to this place. But it is so that your mind will become calm. If we're constantly agitated by thoughts of how does this affect me? How can I profit by this? What's the angle? All of that kind of calculating mind. There's no possibility whatsoever of discovering what's beyond, what is within this heart center that you have discovered. And so then the next part of the process, as I say, this is an integrated activity. As you begin to do them. Only the last is somewhat independent. We'll get there. But the reason you want to be able to free your mind from agitation is that when you are able to do that, you can practice contemplation, concentration, and meditation, and sink into the silence. Sink below this level of agitated thinking. Sinking below. You sink below the agitation, the anxiety, the anguish, and happiness, temporary happiness. You sink below all that. And what you discover is the witness presence. That which Krishna is pointing to when he says, you are not the doer. You are not the actor. The fruits are not yours. They are not even those of the witness. The witness simply sees them all. As it also says in the Gita, she or he who sees Brahman in every action attains to Brahman. The witness begins to see. So as you become adept at sitting in the seat of the witness, you see clearly the truth of what Krishna says, the truth of what Sri Ramakrishna says, the truth of what Jesus says. You see that the spiritual reality is the real reality, and that the other is a lesser reality, one that is made of dream and delusion. It isn't that it isn't real. It is simply a lesser truth. As Vivekananda said, we do not move from error to truth. We move, if you will, from lower truth to higher truth. And when you are in that witness seat, then you are able to see all this going on around you as something that is happening in your presence, you the divine being. Saguna Atman. Atman with attributes, the ability to witness. And respond. Saguna Brahman, Saguna Atman, is the inner voice that will guide us and guide our actions and our thoughts. We call it, in common parlance, we may call it our conscience. It is beyond both the I maker, the ahamkara, and the buddhi, the discrimination. It is that which sees clearly and reacts appropriately and will guide us. And so Sri Krishna says, it is the delight of the wise to obey the Atman, because they are sitting in that witness seat and not trapped in the three lower centers, but are awake, as Sri Ramakrishna says. The Kundalini, the spiritual energy, comes to that Anahata center, the heart center, and stays there. So you're awake in that. Now there's a step beyond, but let's see what all of this has meant to you, if anything at all, and what your comments from your own wisdom are, your own experience, or what questions you may have about this process of finding reverence, abandoning selfishness, and then, having done those two things, practice them for some time, the ability to sink into silence and find your true nature. Any comments? Anything to add from your own wisdom? Or anything to ask?
How do we know if our consciousness has moved from the lower three chakras to the higher chakras?
You feel a fullness in your heart. Your feeling toward the world changes. There is a greater sense of compassion for others and less concern in any particular situation, less concern about how it affects you. Yes, our left limbic system and our left mind will constantly generate thoughts about that. But this abandoning selfishness means letting go of those self-concerned thoughts and seeing ourselves as part of a greater whole. It culminates in Savikalpa Samadhi, this lower samadhi in which you see that the divine presence, that consciousness, as Swami Yogeshananda used to say, consciousness is primary, is not plural, and is not local. We are simply a point in that consciousness, a point of awareness within that consciousness. And when those feelings and those thoughts begin to emerge in us, and we are drawn to reading such books as I know you read, Brahmadas, then you know that you are substantially left behind those three lower centers. Yes.
Right. I see pictures. I've seen pictures of the chakras in different parts of the body, but you won't actually feel anything in that part of the body, will you? It's more, you're describing more like, what are your thoughts in general, or what are your...
You may have a feeling, you may see light, you may hear a sound. Swami Prabhupada used to say, feel that living presence, that warmth at the heart.
Mm.
But definitely if your thoughts are drawn there, this is the process opening up. Thanks for that question, Brahmadas. That was good. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara.
First Bhagavad, then we'll go back to Brahmadas.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
You see, to think upon heart as a centrally placed organ which beats 72 times per minute is not heart. That is why we say in the heart of matter, in the very central core. This is the reason why whatever you say is the meaning is divided into three portions. Shabdartha, literal meaning of what you say. Bhavartha, what is meant by that one. And Guhyartha, the concealed meaning behind it. Until you get to the Guhyartha, Shabdartha is going to be totally useless. It's a flickering thing. It comes and goes away. So this is the reason why I was thinking about our Chandi part. In Chandi part, after slaying all the demons, Mother Goddess asked Devas, what more do you want me to do for you? At which point Deva says, Bhagavatya Pratam Sarvam Na Kinchit Avasheshate. Whatever was necessary, you already have done. Nothing remains behind that we wanted to be done. When you reach that state, then you are in the state of being divine. When your desires are so much burnt out that you say, I wish I had this, I wish I had that. Because these wishes are like the litter of a rabbit. They keep on multiplying. But when you come to a state, you say, now I don't want anything more. Thus far, no further. Then you know you enter the central part of the Kundalini, which does not generate any more wishes or desires.
This is precisely, thank you, Bhagavan. This is precisely what is meant by being seated firmly and routinely in that witness seat. Nothing to want, nothing to fear, simply observing universe as it is and creates and does and shares. You simply see it from that perspective. Nothing to desire, because you see, I am that. Thank you, Bhagavat.
Brother Shankara.
Yes, Uma.
Right now, it's the best time and the worst of times to apply the wisdom of what you say. Why it is worst time? We all know. These are the times, unprecedented. I mean, so restrictive. We want to do so many things. We want to go here and there on this vacation, that vacation, and just simply get bored. I mean, all our worldly people, I'm talking about us. So when that thought comes, and then when you hear about the dire necessity that people are facing these days in Afghanistan, people are running frantically for their life to just be safe, to not be killed. And when you see families struggling for food, there is no food on the table, there are no jobs around, and all these calamities that people are facing, when you put your perspective, when you juxtaposition your inconveniences to their deprivation of life itself, then you awaken that I am being, of course, I'm suffering from this lack and that lack, and nothing seems to be normal. But when you compare and put those people, whom you see totally deprived of even the minimum, then something happens. That kundalini or whatever your conscience awakens, and you become, or you try to put yourself in their position.
This is the compassion
This is compassion.
and feeling for others
Yes.
that Sri Krishna says in the Gita is so dear to him. And it only comes from this awakening of the heart, so that one can identify with the anguish and the suffering of others. And for that matter, their joys and their accomplishments.
Yes.
But it is only when one feels that. And then one feels motivated to do what one is able to be of service to these people.
Right.
And that service is most auspiciously offered sacramentally or as worship. If you send some money, if you write a letter as Amnesty International asks you to do on behalf of others, if you give money to Doctors Without Borders so that they can help in Afghanistan, in Haiti, and any of the innumerable other places around the world where there's so much anguish and suffering.
Whatever little you can do, either offering your service or money or whichever way. But the primary thing is that you stop thinking only of yourself.
Yes, precisely. And that is that process of abandoning selfishness that allows you to sink into the silence of contemplation, concentration, and meditation, and become aware of this much greater presence that is the doer, that is the actor, that is the generator of all that we are experiencing.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
Yes, not a question, but I was just reminded of, we are talking about desires, and Holy Mother's prayer was to desire for desirelessness. So if we did, the only desire is for praying for desirelessness, for God to give us that.
Or for our sacred desires. our desire to be free, our desire to be awakened. She herself prayed that her mind would become pure as a star, so that she would be fully awake. Ramadas, did you have anything more? We said we would come back to you and then didn't.
No, I think you were thinking of someone else there.
Okay. Anyone else? Anything?
That's me. That's me. Hi, my brother Shankara. I wanted to make a comment.
How do you mistake you for me?
When we do our practices, I notice that you become contented with our circumstances, day-to-day circumstances, whatever is happening, you become more stronger and calmer and don't react to them, but do the good deeds besides all those, but you become contented with the circumstances. And we get closer to the instrument of peace, what St. Francis of Assisi said, make me thy instrument of peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. That kind of absorbs into our blood slowly.
Well,
That's what
that is the turnaround.
that's what I notice.
Yes. And that is exactly true. From that place of santosha, of contentment, one can see much more clearly
Clearer.
what it is that is actually going on outside of us and in the world,
That's right.
and see more clearly what it is, if anything, that we can do to help. And it allows us to be aware that there are many things about which we can do nothing.
Exactly. It's not in our, we can't, yes.
But those then are, we offer that to the Lord and say, this is my prayer, Lord. This is all I can offer, is my prayer for that person or that situation. And you do, spontaneously.
Yes, yes. The more equanimity develops and then the forbearance, these all kind of add into you. They come, you get absorbed by all those things. That's what I notice.
This is Saguna Atman. These are the attributes of Atman: contentment, well wishes, mercy,
Yes.
joy.
It takes long time of practice. This takes a long time. It
And
doesn't come very easily.
no, it doesn't. But
It's a continuous practice.
the fact that we can do it in this lifetime
Yes.
is proof, as
It's
far as the great sages say. It is proof that we have been here before. And so all we need to do is continue to put one foot in front of the other as best we can, as much as we can, and as intelligently and intentionally as we can. And the progress then continues.
Thank you, Brother Shankara. That's all.
And as we'll see in the final reading, there is much help to be had. But before we go ahead to any of that, is there anything else for you to add or ask?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, Swayam.
I think you already sort of answered this. It's very hard to become totally unselfish. For example, like those birds in that story who threw themselves into the fire to become food for the travelers.
Yes.
So we attempt to do the best we can. We offer, give everything a Godward turn and do the best we can, as you said. But is it necessary or to get to that level of unselfishness for liberation? Can we get there with practice?
We don't need to worry about it, dear. As I said, we we simply do the spiritual practices and intentionally, regularly, patiently, and these, the reason those birds were able to throw themselves into the fire, or this is another story from Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga, the Brahmin family was willing to starve themselves to death in order to feed the sacred visitor. And every visitor, as they saw them, was sacred, was because they no longer had any concern about the body. The body was just simply an instrument, and in that moment, in those moments, the appropriate thing for that instrument to do was to sacrifice itself for someone else. But it isn't something we need to fret about. If and when that time comes, then, but it is not something one should do because they think it is a good idea. That's akin to committing suicide. And that's not appropriate. So the feeling that you talk about that was by the birds or the Brahmin family, those beings came to that, and it was very sincere what they did, because they knew that they weren't losing anything. There was nothing for them to lose.
Brother Shankara.
Thank you.
Brother Shankara, I wanted to add one point about selfishness itself. The word selfish compared to the word self-centered, there is I think, a nuance there. There is a difference between being selfish in the sense of so selfish that you deprive others and take away from them in order to benefit, in order to have profit, exploit somebody, kill somebody, harm somebody. That is one kind of, I would say, worst selfishness. Then there is a kind of self-centeredness in which you don't hurt anybody, but all you do is to focus only on your happiness, on your benefit, on your well-being. That is also selfishness, but not of that category in which you are ready to kill or hurt or deprive somebody. So I think most of us are self-centered, if not selfish. The same way, unselfish to the degree of throwing yourself in the fire or self-sacrificing, like that story that you just mentioned. We may not reach that level of unselfishness. However, in our day-to-day life, even if we start thinking of how my words, my behavior, my actions are going to affect others in a harmful way, that also I think is a first step towards becoming utterly unselfish. That's how I think that you can move from one level to another in a systematic gradation or step by step.
Precisely. It's not a matter of black and white.
Yeah.
It's a matter of a spectrum.
Yes.
It's from the blackest avidya, the blackest ignorance and lack of knowledge, to the purest
Yes.
selflessness
Mhm.
It's a spectrum in between
Yeah.
of increasing light
Yeah.
and decreasing blackness until and so it's a completely relative thing.
Mhm.
And as we move along that spectrum, it is spontaneous because of our spiritual practices. There are, of course, decisions that we seem to make. You know, I will give so much money to such and such a cause. I will give so much money to Doctors Without Borders. I will give so much money to Atlanta Community Food Bank. Those kinds of decisions. They seem to be decisions we're taking. But if you're really in that witness seat, you see that this too is not your action. This is simply a spontaneous reaction or action from the awakening self. And so we as Swami Shivananda was very fond of saying, the secret is installing God in your heart. Then all of the virtues manifest themselves because they are adherent, they are part of that divine presence. This is what's meant by seeing from that witness seat and noticing that things are happening, and it seems as if there is a will to do it, but in fact, it is simply the attributes of Atman, or the divine presence, manifesting themselves. Thank you, Uma.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankar, I didn't want to prolong this discussion, but Bhartrihari has classified the spectrum in 4 categories. Those people who will suffer to make somebody happy is category 1. Those people, I'm also happy and they are also happy, category 2.
Mm-hmm.
Category 3, in which if I'm happy, I don't care if somebody else is unhappy. Then what is the category 4? He says, Yetu gnanti nirarthakam paraitam te ken janimahe. Those people who want to destroy somebody's happiness without any benefit to them. Which category should I put them into? I do not know.
Well, this is the depth of ignorance. This is the demonic personality as described in chapter 17 of the Gita. That 4th category that you spoke of. But all of us are somewhere on the spectrum of ignorance.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would not be here this morning. There would be no need for us to be here this morning. We might come simply to enjoy the company, the holy company, but there would be no need for us to be here. So we're all awakening, and somewhere on that spectrum of awakening. So is there anything else? And Bhagavad, you said, prolong the discussion. The discussion is what we're doing. It isn't something that's being prolonged. This is studying together the art of spirituality.
Yes, yes. This is the heart of our meeting, I would say.
Anything else from anyone?
We were talking about sacrifice and the birds that gave up their lives for the Brahmins. And I've considered that this world is sacrifice. Like whenever I eat a chicken or fish, I sometimes consider this animal gave up its life so that I could live. Yes. And even if you eat vegetables, who's to say that vegetables don't want to die? Maybe want to live too. We can't say.
Yes, Joseph Campbell was assailed for eating meat by a vegetarian. And Campbell listened for a while and then finally said, rather sharply, "Oh, that's all very well and good, but I would be really afraid to see you coming if I was a carrot." Consciousness is primary, is not plural, and is not local. It exists in the carrot as well as anything else.
That doesn't mean that there's no difference between eating a carrot and a chicken.
No, it simply means that Joseph Campbell was pointing out there is consciousness in the carrot as well.
Sure there is. But that doesn't, to me, that doesn't address the issue of eating or not eating animals, which is what Ramadas was talking about.
Yeah.
Right, and that's actually addressed in an episode of Star Trek where Spock mentions that even a vegetarian must take life to live. And I can't disagree with what he said.
It's true, but it's like, is there a difference between squashing a bug and squashing a human being? Yes. I mean, it matters.
Well, I'm sure the bug wants to live. I don't think the bug wants to die.
But is there no
I'm playing
difference?
devil's advocate. I know there's a difference.
Well, I mean, there are people who believe that there is, or they think they believe there is no difference. Or they'll say they believe there is no difference, but I call BS on that. So,
Cindy,
Well,
yeah,
the way I look at it, one can show feelings on the face. If chicken is hurt or killed, I can see chicken suffering. If a carrot I chew, I cannot see the expressions. I cannot see the emotions. And that psychologically makes meat eating worse than eating vegetables. Now, this can be ideologically wrong because life is life, consciousness is consciousness. However, it does make a difference when I see with my own eyes somebody suffering, which carrot cannot show. So
But my point is that sacrifice seems to be the way of this world. Like, for us.
I'd like to jump in can you guys hear me?
Yes,
I hear you.
Ramadas,
Okay.
thank you. Yes.
I eat meat, I eat animals, but I feel like it's a moral compromise. If I was living up to my highest ideals, I would not. I think that an animal that has the ability to run away also has the ability to suffer more. It's the suffering that makes it run away. I don't know if carrots are conscious, but they're just sitting there. And I seriously doubt that carrots suffer when they're eaten. And I don't doubt that animals suffer. And then the other reasons, if you look at the tremendous cruelty of factory farming as it exists in the United States, like there's an animal rights group there's a lot of groups it's called effective altruism, in which you try to see if the donations that you're making are really most effective. And for animal suffering, we think of things like the Humane Society, but the truth is what the effective altruists do for animal suffering is they're throwing a huge amount of money into developing artificial meat. So you wouldn't have to kill all these billions of chickens who lead terrible lives and just sit in cages all their lives. Okay, so there's the animal suffering. There's the environmental damage is terrible, from farming. If you just got rid of all the cows and substitute them with beans, you would only have about 1/10 as much of the land being used, and that other land could all be returned to parkland and so on. And then also there is the question of health, but that I'm not sure of, so I won't go on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
I think one of the important things is that you can have a relationship with a chicken, just like you can have a relationship with a person or a cat or a dog. And you wouldn't put your beloved pet through the things that we put animals through, that humans eat. And it's the running away thing, but it's also whether we can have a relationship with it or not, and how long its life is. For instance, I think you can have a relationship with a tree, but not so much a carrot. I think there are degrees, and I think it matters.
Exactly.
Even though,
Yeah.
what?
And expression, we cannot see them suffer. If we can see, it hurts inside. And relationship, and why do we love our pets and cannot even imagine that somebody can kill? So there is an emotional attachment. All these factors come into play. So
Well, this clearly is a discussion that could take up a full weekend's retreat.
do we all
And each of us must come to our own conclusions from where we are about what it is that we do and what it is that we eat. And what, as Brahmadas pointed out, what it is that we see as being sacrificed so that we may live. So I'd like to leave this behind, if we may.
Yeah.
See if there's anything else that that wants to be added or asked. And if not, then I'll go on to the final point.
Brother Shankara, I know we want to move away from this topic, but just quickly, what I wanted to add was, like you said, everybody needs to look at all the different pros and cons and make their choice. But to make another person feel like a lower being for making that choice is also a kind of injury. And I kind of face situations like that. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, dear. Anything else from anyone?
This is Stephen.
Yes.
Yeah, it just came to my mind as, listening to this discussion, because it's been in the news quite a bit recently, but, we're talking about the chicken and so forth and the animals. And I think about too that, the unborn embryo, human embryo, the unborn fetus, and, the suffering that the human fetus may experience. So I think that's also part of the larger picture too. There is so much human suffering that maybe we don't fully grasp how much the suffering is involved in an abortion. And I'm not trying to come one side or another on that, but it does seem relevant when we start talking about the suffering of animals.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And of course, that is a whole issue. And what it is. So let's leave that to the side. Whoever's got themselves unmuted we're getting a feedback. Stephen, are you unmuted? Okay, now it's stopped. So we've been through talking about finding reverence as the beginning of the opening of the heart center, that as a companion to that, we begin to see that since there is reason for reverence, there is reason to abandon selfishness, self-centeredness. to direct our attention to that higher that we've seen. As we do that, our mind is able to calm and no longer be constantly distracted by thoughts of I, me, mine. And so we come to sinking into silence, and we discover the witness within. The witness being that interface between the great silence and the manifestation. The fourth step beyond sinking into silence is setting aside that mirror of the witness. The witness in its purified state is a perfect mirror of that which is happening before it. But that is not the final aspect of ourselves. We are that Nirguna Brahman, that Brahman that is without attribute. And so the final step, as described by Sri Krishna, by Jesus, when he mentions the peace that passeth all understanding, the final step is setting aside the mirror and merging so that we become lost. All individuality and all sense of separation is lost in being one with Brahman. So the final step is to set aside the mirror. And that's being fully awake. And what happens then? Sri Ramakrishna is speaking to some devotees, and a devotee named Bijoy says, how can we attain to the vision of the Divine Mother and the realization of the Absolute? Now, this Divine Mother is equivalent to Saguna Brahman. Okay? That which is manifesting all of this, the real doer. So how can we have the vision of the Divine Mother and the realization of the Absolute, the Nirguna Brahman? Sri Ramakrishna, with earnest longing and sincerity, pray and cry. When the heart will be purified, when the heart will be purified, then you will see the vision. The personal God, or Brahman with attributes, is the one who listens to prayers. Pray to him, and he will grant the highest wisdom. God is the internal ruler of all. Forsaking egoism, resign your will to his. Forsaking egoism, resign your will to his will. You will get everything you desire. That's from the condensed version of the gospel. So I'm going to read Sri Ramakrishna's, I'll read the question and then I'll read the answer. Bijoy, how can we attain to the vision of the Divine Mother and the realization of the Absolute? Sri Ramakrishna, with earnest longing and sincerity, pray and cry. When the heart will be purified, then you will see the vision. The personal God or Brahman with attributes is the one who listens to prayers. Pray to him, and he will grant the highest wisdom. God is the internal ruler of all. Forsaking egoism, resign your will to his will. You will get everything you desire. For those of you who are raised in the Christian tradition, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you, all knowledge and all righteousness. For those of us in the Hindu tradition, Sri Krishna turned to me in utter devotion. I see no sinner. Holiness itself shall transform you. So, any final thoughts or questions from anyone? What have you to add or ask about this last of the 4 steps? This finding reverence, abandoning selfishness, sinking into silence, and then setting aside the mirror of personal awareness. Anything at all?
Shankara,
Yes, dear.
excuse me. Do you happen to know where in the gospel that was?
It doesn't, this was a quote given to me by Bill Davis, and it says, small version of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, published by the New York Vedanta Society, page 343. So if you have a condensed version of the Gospel, and I think Jerry does have a condensed version,
You don't.
it'll be on page 343.
Thank you so much.
Could you say one more time what setting aside the mirror involves?
It is the further sinking into silence, Tom, where the mind stops thinking. There is no longer any vibration in the mind stuff, which is, of course, all of the nervous systems of the body. It is entering what has been called the great silence. And when one enters that great silence, they lose all sense of separation, of witnessing anything. It's indescribable because there is no one to describe what happens. There is no witness there. There is no experiencer. And this is why Christ calls it the peace that passeth all understanding. Our understanding is made of thinking and speaking and conceptualization. One enters that great peace or great silence. And when one returns from there, they are transformed and may not even live long. The story goes that most people who do that, they live a maximum of 21 days. But Sri Ramakrishna says, those great ones, the Ishvara Kotis, the Paramahamsas, they have the ability to enter there, to have that realization, return, and then begin to teach the path to reach that ultimate state of freedom or being fully awake. That is to say, there is no ignorance left. No ignorance, because ignorance is made of thought and speech. Does that get it? Tom?
Oh, I just wanted to say, yeah, that gets it. I just raised my hand rather than unmuting.
Okay, well, I don't see well, dear.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for repeating that.
Okay, good. Anyone else? Anything? Thank you for the question, Tom. Yes?
I think this is a beautiful discussion today, but what I am thinking in my mind, because my camera is not working. That's why. So what Sri Krishna says, a pure mind is Brahman. So when we reach to that state as a pure mind, there are no vibrations, nothing at all. And at that level, all you see is Brahman. So this is what one of the Swamis says. The minute you start seeing in everything Brahman, nothing else, that is, you reach to the top. At that level, all you have is compassion for the neighbor. This is what Christ said, love the neighbor. So in that respect, there is, of course, you could look at it both ways, because you can say everything is Atman, or with all your compassion, whether whatever you want to eat, what you don't want to eat, everything depends upon you.
Okay, Balaji, you're right there. I'll only just add this. The purified mind, according to Sri Ramakrishna, and for that matter, Sri Krishna, the purified mind is both Saguna Brahman and Nirguna Brahman. So one sees only perfection. One acts only perfectly in that state of purified awareness. So there is Saguna Brahman, and Sri Ramakrishna calls this Vijnana, the knowledge beyond Jnana that says everything that happens, everything that is, both within manifestation, that which is beyond manifestation, or in which manifestation is rooted, that which is and that which is not, and that which is beyond is and is not, is all the divine. It is Brahman. So this is why when one attains to the pure mind, one becomes, as Sri Ramakrishna says, like the expert dancer that cannot put a foot wrong, because there's no temptation or no desire to do anything other than manifest the perfect attributes of Saguna Atman or Saguna Brahman. Thank you, Balaji.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
I think Sri Ramakrishna also says that pure mind, pure intellect, and pure bhakti, they're all the same.
Yes.
And also one more comment is the same mind that we transcend the mind to reach that level. And then in the very highest level, the mind is annihilated. Am I right?
Well, that's one way of putting it, that it's annihilated. As Sri Ramakrishna doesn't like that way of thinking about it. He says it simply stops functioning for a time. And then when it is returned to, when the awareness returns to the mind, that the mind is totally is totally perfect, is totally purified. That is to say, all ignorance, all samskaras have been burnt to ashes in the fire of knowledge. That's the way it's put in the Upanishads. And Sri Ramakrishna quotes that. So, but these are things that we can say these words and just know that we'll know what they really mean when we arrive there. In the meantime, we're on this wonderful spiritual adventure of studying the art of spirituality together, celebrating one another, celebrating the life that we're living, and going forward. As Swami Swahananda said, go forward. And Swami Brahmananda said, let us go forward together.
Thank you. So we're all in that same spectrum, like you said, we're on that process of the step ladder of purification of the mind.
Yes, well, that if you remember last week, I sang that song, Climbing Jacob's Ladder.
Yes.
And that's exactly it. We're climbing the ladder of the spine, ascending through the various spiritual centers until finally we become fully illumined at the highest. And but exactly what that means can't be said, because there is no experiencer there to return and tell us this is what was experienced. So, Savikalpa Samadhi, the experience of the divine as the only reality, and ourselves as each of us as part of that. As Breaker of this world's chain says, speech cannot hold thee nor mind, yet without thee we think not nor speak. Love, who art partial to none, we are equal before thy sight. Each of us is a part of that whole. As one of the great saints in the Love Poems from God book says, God told him, it was a man in this case, each soul completes me. That's a lovely way to think about ourselves. William Blake put it somewhat more humorously. He said, we ought to think of ourselves as highly as immortals ought to think. I love that. We ought to think of ourselves as highly as immortals ought to think. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankar, the 4 steps, the reverence, the selfishness, the sinking in the silence, the setting aside the mirror, and all of what we discussed today, it just reminds me of that saying that says to know thyself.
Yes.
To know thy real self. And I think when we know and we say, I think we think the me that is the me and is really not the real me. and when we begin to know, I remember I was having a conversation with someone and they said something and it just came, and I know it had to come from a greater aspect of me, but it came out was Yeah, you can't recognize yourself as Brahman, as God, because you think there's a you. And that stayed with me, and it didn't come from my own intellect. It came through me, but it wasn't, I know that it wasn't from me. And I stayed with that a while. I was like, oh wow, what does that mean? And it reminds me of our discussion today, because when we know, if I think there's a me, then I think there's a you in all forms. But when I know everything is God or as Brahman with attributes, then I have a different perspective. And it reminds me of that song that goes, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
Yeah.
And so we can get caught up in the dreams, but when we really know ourselves, then we really begin to understand the meaning of that song.
Yes.
And so all of the conversation today reminds me of that, and just reminds me why it's also important to know thy real self.
Yes.
Because when you know your real self, you take a different perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Trina. Thank you, Katrina. That was all just beautiful, all of what you said. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
The feeling of reverence is for who or what? You mentioned we should have a feeling of
everyone has their own answer. Ramadas, everyone has their own answer. For the farmer that came to see Sri Ramakrishna, it was the goat. For the highest, from seeing it at the highest, one sees the self, that is to say, Saguna Brahman, Brahman with attributes. One sees the self at play everywhere. So it depends. Some people, and if you want to know whether it's true, just back into their Ferrari and you'll find that they have great reverence for their Ferrari. Does that mean they're bad and wrong? No, it simply means that they haven't waked up beyond understanding that something that comes and goes is not, no matter how fine it is not what they're truly revering. We're revering that which generates that which comes and goes. To understand this fully, read Yajnavalkya's talk with his wife Maitreyi in the Big Forest Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad.
Yes.
What is the self? Yajnavalkya explains it beautifully. So each of us will have our own answer, Brahmadas. Anything else?
Shankara?
Yes, dear.
Could you please talk a little bit about sinking into silence?
Well, that's what we do when we learn to practice contemplation, concentration, and meditation. And that's why the precursor to it has to be doing away with this constant agitation that comes with the attitude that the world is I, me, mine. If I constantly see myself at the center of the universe and everything affects, in other words, we're listening to the left side of our brain, the limbic system and the waking awareness as thought, particularly the lower thoughts. if we're constantly hypnotized by that, which is living in those three lower centers that Sri Ramakrishna mentioned, then there's no ability for us to hold our minds steady long enough to sink toward the silence, sink into the silence. And it is a gradual descent. First, we learn to hold the mind steady on a mantra, on a visualization, whatever it is, following the breath. And slowly and slowly, we sink. This is one way, it's just a metaphor for it. We sink below the level of all of those thoughts and considerations. And as we do, we feel the presence of something more, that which is generating all of this, the self. Another way of saying Saguna Brahman or Saguna Atman. As it said in the evening prayer, speech cannot hold thee, nor mind. In other words, we can't really talk about it. We can't really conceptualize it. Speech cannot hold thee nor mind, yet without thee we think not nor speak. So we come to that sense. And that's what Sri Ramakrishna meant when he said, when you begin to have that awareness, you say, what is this? What is this? And then you begin to identify it with all the words and terms and all that stuff. But that doesn't even begin to contain it. And then as we go even beyond that, we sink into this deeper level of silence where there's only that. And that's Savikalpa Samadhi. What happens beyond that is something Patanjali says, it's no longer a matter of self-effort. It's something that happens to you. You move into that total silence, that is to say, no vibration. And that's this other form of samadhi called nirvikalpa samadhi. And then you either do or do not return from that. And so that's all I know about it.
Thank you so much.
Anything else? All right, dears. As Swami Yogeshananda taught us to say, let there be peace in outer space. Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters. Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees. May the gods be peaceful. May the whole universe be pervaded by peace. Let that infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. If there's nothing else from anyone, anything at all? All right. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. Go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the divine being as our mother and father. That is the prayer from here. And I suspect it is the prayer in your hearts as well. Any final thought from anyone? All right, dears.
Thank you, Brother Shankara. Thanks, everybody.
For anybody who wishes to join us, tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock, we have our reading and discussion group on the book Love Poems from God. Tuesday night, of course, at 8, we study the life of Holy Mother. On Wednesday, we are studying Jnana Yoga. We're talking about cosmos, the microcosm. And then next Saturday, we'll continue our study of realizing God, Swami Prabhavananda's collection of talks. And then the next Sunday, there'll be a talk, and I don't know about what yet. I'll just let what happened today rest and see what arises as a good follow-on from that. And of course, your comments and questions are always a very integral part of that process. Anything else from anyone, dears? All right. Until next time. Jai, 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 the Divine Presence.